From Calvary Church of Santa Ana, this is the Calvary Life Podcast, the show where we share stories, laugh together, and have discussions about faith, life, and God with people from Calvary Church. Here's your host, Eric Wakeling.
All right, welcome to the Calvary Life Podcast. It is great to be back in action. And for today, we have Karen Bergstrom here with us. We're very happy to have you, longtime Calvary member. How are you doing today, Karen?
Good. It's good to be here.
Awesome. It is great to have you. And we're going to talk today about something, a ministry, a nonprofit called Safe Families for Children. But as we get into that, first, I just love to be able to hear a little bit of your Calvary origin story. So when did you start being part of Calvary Church?
Like really way back when. I'm not kidding.
Exactly.
Back in the 60s, my
awesome.
parents started coming to Calvary. There were 6 of us. We were a blended family,
Yeah.
which was unusual in Orange County in those days. But parents had already had their own journey with addiction and divorce and all kinds of things. And we landed here at Calvary as a family of 6 kids and mom and dad. And so we've been going. And then I married someone that I met in the college department.
Oh, is that when you guys met? Was in college group?
Right.
You can tell too. You've been around Calvary for a while if you say the college department.
The college department.
No one says that.
They don't know. Yeah, we were in that department. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I met Rick in the college department, and
Perfect.
Then we married and raised our kids here. Eventually, moved away, came back, but basically
That's right.
raised the 4 Bergstroms here too.
Who was the senior pastor then when you first started coming here?
Samzik.
It was Michael Samzik.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
Awesome.
were meeting over in the in the fireside building was the church.
Okay, that's right. That's right.
There was no Samzik.
Yeah. So that's what everybody has to imagine, like being inside Fellowship Hall, that's the church.
That
you
was
know?
the big church.
Before the chapel.
Yeah.
And before the chapel is definitely called Samswick Chapel.
Right. It's called it's just called the church. Yeah.
It's the church.
Yeah, orange groves everywhere. And so, yeah.
Okay, and so you're right. You said because you had moved up into Seattle area for a while, came back, and then that's awesome. And yeah, we love your family. Just incredible, involved family here at our church, and a crazy wild husband that a lot of people know is one of our elders. So again, we're going to talk about safe families. But I'd like to first get a little bit of a sense of, okay, what was some of your background professionally, and how did that lead you towards Safe Families?
Yeah. I'm a clinical psychologist and grew up professionally working at Olive Crest. Really started when I was 19 years old.
Okay,
and
wow.
Pre-degree and work. Olive Crest is a local nonprofit here that basically raises children, whether it's foster care or residential. Just in that era, I think we had 42 residential 6-bed homes.
Right. I kind of grew up in that world, right?
Oh, yeah, your parents.
Yes.
Yeah, your mom and dad.
Yeah. It was called Concept 7. It was like
7
almost like a competitor, so to speak, back in the day.
They were right next to each other. Yeah, George Wakeling.
That's right.
I knew George Wakeling, yeah.
Yes. I grew up playing pool, in group homes with guys out of juvenile hall. And that's like was my
it was
background.
the orphanages of America in that
really
era.
was, you're right.
So you grew up in that same setting as that was really what orphanages were like in America.
Yeah, that's true.
In the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the exact same world I grew up in. And through all of that, determined that I was going to get my degree and kind of stay in this field of
Karen, this is
providing
crazy.
help.
You're like, maybe I need to take you on as like a surrogate mom, because my mom, was, she wasn't a clinical psychologist, but she was a marriage, family, child counselor, and as a therapist and a child care worker in group homes. And so
exactly the same life. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not old enough to be your mom.
No. That's why,
Right. Yeah, right. I'm totally old enough. Absolutely old enough. So, yeah, it was a really similar thing. And I knew your parents.
Cool.
But they were... Yeah, so the Valeurs and the Wakelings were both opening orphanages, basically, finding homes for people to live in. So, I was raised professionally. That's really how I say I grew up professionally.
Yeah. How'd you get a heart for that? What was it drew you to that?
Definitely my family of origin. So I mentioned I was from a blended family. So my mom at age 21, had her third child, which was me.
Okay.
So she was on welfare and then had my brother when she was 23. So she had 4 children by the age of 23 and no father in the home, tremendous poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there was a family that could have ended up in the foster system, adoption system, in fact, my mom at one point did take us down to consider adoption because she knew she couldn't provide the life that she wanted to give her children because of her own addictions and problems and so forth. So anyways, I was definitely raised in a similar life. Those first 5 years of my life were similar to the life of many of the families I served. So it wasn't out of an experience recently, because by the time I got involved there, my family had blended and middle class family, and so I didn't really have an experience of poverty during those years, but I think my muscle memory was such that I remembered what it was like to really not have a home or have the security of a home. So
yeah, you were vulnerable in a sense, right? Like if that hadn't have, if like your eventual stepdad and whatever, right? Like it hadn't come along and you guys had that blended family, then it would have been, you guys were kind of vulnerable in some way.
Yeah, we were definitely on that track.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's where people, I bet like a lot of people don't know. I mean, that's like people think of like, because your family, people are like, oh, kind of legendary Calvary family.
Yeah.
And like, and they are.
Yeah.
And it's really cool.
Yeah.
But didn't know that was a rough patch there.
Yeah. And Norma and Jerry Bauer, that was my parents. And so they met at a time when neither of them were walking in faith.
Okay.
But in that process redeemed themselves. They went to Forest Home, were invited to Forest Home, and they became Christians up there. And so even Forest Home is a part of Calvary's story. That was another place that my parents made a decision to follow Christ. And that's when Calvary Church became a really important spiritual family.
Okay.
To them and to all of the 6 of us.
Cool. Well, we love Forest Home. It's an amazing place. And so many people have had some significant, sort of transformative experience there with the Lord. So it's really special. Yeah. We get a little Hume friendly here, obviously.
Yeah.
But we also love Forest Home. Okay, so that's as you're going, that's kind of you've had some of that life experience, and then now you're in this career, working at Olive Crest, doing some of this, like doing this psychology, doing this counseling, but also kind of social work at some level, right? Like in these, like what were some of maybe because you started to kind of rise up in some leadership roles then there?
At some point, like I said, grew up professionally there and ended up more on the side of a program manager. I ended up more creating models of care. Okay. Really kind of fell in love with the executive kind of side. So I ended up as the chief programs officer there, which meant I think we were about a $40 million agency, 700 employees, and we had cool things we did all over LA, Orange County, San Diego, Las Vegas. So I ended up more on that social organizing kind of side. Yeah. Yeah.
And so has the whole world then of that kind of world of that caring for children, let's say like in an Olive Crest, did that over time move away from the experience that I had with my family, with these group homes and sort of like you said, modern day orphanages? How did that shift over time?
I just, probably in a simple way, it was a separation of church and state. It became then a child welfare. Okay. We created systems that care for kids, and then it was no longer the church's responsibility. Originally it was. Yeah. And we kind of we relinquished the role of caring for our orphans and our widows, all the vulnerable. We really put them into systems more than they came a responsibility. So, even at Olive Crest, I felt the split from the church. Calvary Church, would always participate at any invitation, but churches weren't naturally responsible for local orphans.
Right, right. And so then that kind of leads us towards this whole thing. Like, when was the first time, and we got to explain it in a moment here. In a moment here, we'll explain what we're talking about with Safe Families for Children. But when did you first hear about this
Safe
concept?
Families. Yeah, there was Dr. Anderson is the founder, and he was really like a colleague doing the same thing we were doing in Olive Crest at a place called Lydia Home in downtown Chicago. Okay. So literally a similar experience there, but he had this idea that what if we stopped child abuse before it started? And what if we stood at the front door of child welfare and helped families before abuse occurred?
Yeah.
And so, because what we were finding across the country was that there's a whole group of people that nobody owns. So if you're in trouble but you haven't abused your child,
Yep.
there really is no place for you.
Okay.
So we call the fancy word is prevention or edge of care. But 90% of all the child abuse calls that America gets do not move forward into help.
Okay.
But we know that 90% of those calls, pretty difficult, scary things are happening in families.
Yeah.
But whose role is it?
Right. Because these are people, so that the kids are not being removed by the state or the police or whoever, right? Like, or
Right.
the county or like.
Right.
Okay.
So a school teacher called, the Child Protective Services, or a neighbor called, or a police officer. But when they investigated, definitely trouble, but not abuse.
Right. Right.
So the thought was, as we were raising all of these children, one of the key things was that the children were young adults were more vulnerable if they were raised in foster care. Human trafficking,
Okay.
Percentages, early unwed pregnancies, drug abuse, homelessness, any social ill you can imagine. If you put a child that had been raised in foster care into the statistics, they were about 50 times more chance than our children would have had a chance to be involved. So
Wow.
the system wasn't able to raise children.
Right.
And so
Right.
those of us in that system kind of had a collective stomach ache.
Yes.
We know this isn't enough.
Yep.
We do the best we can, and we hire the greatest staff we can, but staff and government and people really can't raise children like families can.
Right. Right.
So Safe Families was this idea of Dr. Anderson in Chicago, which the idea was, what if we just asked ordinary neighbors to love families that were struggling and take care of their kids for a while the family went and did what they needed to get on their feet.
Okay.
And so this is all pre-government, pre-agency, pre-child welfare.
Yeah.
But families in pretty significant struggle, which would be really similar to my mom.
Okay. Exactly.
Earnest families that desire to make it,
Yep.
but really don't have the resources. And poverty is 70% of all those calls that I mentioned that come in are related to poverty.
Oh, really? So more of like people thinking it's a neglectful kind of situation, like it's a poverty-related neglect,
Right.
like neglect.
Well, we mix
or,
neglect and
or-
child abuse as we say.
Oh, okay.
We accidentally thought those were the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
But neglect is a really different thing.
I remember I used to say those in the same sentence, right? Yeah.
Child abuse, sexual abuse, neglect,
Yes.
child abuse, neglect. And not that either of them don't have profound effects
Sure.
on us as children, but the solutions are different.
Right.
I say the impact could be similar,
Right.
and we can call it all abuse if it would be fair to call it abuse, but the solutions are very different.
Right. And there's probably a difference somehow between a very sort of spiteful, intentional neglect and like I'm just trying to make it, so
Yeah.
therefore I'm
I'm
neglecting.
going to leave my 4 kids alone all day while I go to work.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to leave them with the wrong people
Right.
because I'm desperate
Right.
to
right.
go and get a job. And those are different problems to solve. But we solve them all by removing children.
Right.
That was kind of our global idea in foster care, and that we just didn't get the results in America that we can be proud of.
Right. Because, like, let me try to describe Safe Families a little bit with something, but I want you to like either
butt in.
agree or push back.
Okay, all right.
Because is it at some level like voluntary foster care? You know, or is that even a wrong way to say it? How would you say that? Like,
I'd say voluntary neighborhood care.
Okay,
Because
cool.
when you put foster, we think government. So this is
Right.
really 100% voluntary neighbors.
Okay.
Helping people in their same zip code
Yep.
that are in trouble, that they don't know.
Yes, I love it. And so you have, let's just kind of, can we like maybe even paint a picture or I mean, even if you want to tell a story, but we could kind of paint a picture of just a mom who's, I'm trying to think, like, who's got a couple kids.
So 90% or 70% of the children are under 5 years old that need a place to live. And so the idea is a mom that's struggling, a single mom's pretty typical.
Yep.
And is at risk to maybe losing her children into foster care because of abuse, neglect, all of the. And what her option would be is to call the Safe Family Network across the United States. We're also in England, Scotland, Wales, Canada, and Nairobi.
Wow.
So it's now a movement that's gone global. But here they would call, and the hotline would send them to the zip code closest to them where there's a safe family. And that safe family is a family, a volunteer family that attends a church like Calvary Church and has been vetted and trained and background checked through a church ministry and is approved as the local safe family of that zip code.
Yeah.
And so then a local agency plays in this kind of story, and those two families are matched with each other, and it's a voluntary, would you watch my children for a little while I go get back on my feet?
And if I choose, I want to have my kids back, you get your kids back, right?
It is. They don't lose their custody. They don't lose their rights. There's no legal involved in this. The family signs
so it's not kidnapping or something.
Right. Signs over pretty sophisticated paperwork, much
sure.
like you would if you took your children on, if you went on vacation, left your kids with your friends.
Right.
So it's almost more like an extended family or a neighborhood program.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. So that's really beautiful because there's a lot of reasons. What are some of the reasons, I guess? Like people, is it on the verge of homelessness?
It's like the
poverty,
number one
drugs?
referral today is homelessness.
Homelessness,
It's that people are living on the streets and their children aren't safe. Or they're living in really unsafe non-homes.
But if they could have 3 months to kind of work and get their stuff going, get their, get some of these things figured out, like without having to like worry about their kids also. Is that kind of the notion? I mean,
definitely.
Okay.
So it's the average day is still 45 days.
Oh, okay. 45 days.
But it could be a weekend.
That's
and
right.
It could be 6 months. So it's really voluntary. It's about interestingly enough, that 45 days has remained after 18 years. We're 18 years old now, so we're teenagers.
Wow.
I mean, we're leaving teenage years.
Yeah, you're grown-ups.
And we're getting almost grown-ups. It's still that 45-day stay is a very typical need. Okay. Not for a family's life to be totally restored and redeemed and everything's working, but for them to have enough oxygen to breathe, to be the parents that their kids need.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that. And we talk a lot about how maybe in circles like Calvary of, hey, we don't want to just have the government that does everything, the government shouldn't be in charge of all this, like welfare state, blah, blah, these kind of thoughts. But then we always say it should be the role of the church, right? But then it has to become, all right, well, so then church,
you got to do it. Yeah.
You better do it.
And I think that's what made me the most nervous because I am a church girl. And when we started thinking about how would this ever work, how could we ever take on what the government can't do. And this idea of safe families came up. We met for a year here in Orange County at Olive Crest and all these church leaders, and Pastor Wakeling was involved. I just tapped on the shoulders of people I knew and said, would you meet with me for 1 year?
Yeah.
And let's come up with a model that if we ask the church and they said yes, we can actually keep everybody safe.
Yeah.
Safe families is both sides. The host family is safe.
Yeah.
And what I love about the definition of host, it means to keep something else alive. And so we are hosting so that another family can stay alive.
Wow.
So this isn't foster care.
Yeah.
We're not substituting the parents. We're hosting their children while keeping something else alive. So believe me, we didn't know how sophisticated that word was. That definition came later. But it's just the idea of giving a message to a family that I'm hanging in there for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch these kids on your behalf.
Yeah, exactly. And it's got to be just such a life-saving moment for the kids, the parents of those kids, but also of that quote-unquote host family even. So like maybe can you share without names, I'm sure, but like just share a story of one of these kind of things. Maybe even of a Calvary family if you got one. But
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. So we've hosted this has happened 55,000 times in America.
Wow.
So this is now, we've really now started impacting a change in child welfare. So across the country, there's all kinds of research going on about why did this work.
Okay.
So I guess our own story with the Bergstroms, even though it's a little bit of an older story, was a homeless family came to Calvary, and they were out in the parking lot asking for money. And I thought, you asked the wrong person for money, because little do they know what I do.
Or the right person.
The right person. So this relationship began with just, what do you really need?
Yeah.
Because they didn't seem like they really needed $10. And so this relationship began, and it really began on behalf of the parents. They were not married, but this was a husband and a wife. I mean, a father and a mother. And a little girl. And we just entered this journey with her and with him. And they had a much more sophisticated problems than homelessness, which most homeless people have more sophisticated problems. But really what happened is we adopted them.
Yeah.
And so even at Calvary, you got to know both Tyler and Ashley.
We did.
And their daughter. And it was a long road, but all of our kids. But probably one of my favorite stories was Kyle was at Biola. And he was home on Facebook with the mom, who was in our home hanging out one night. And while they were on Facebook looking at people, Kyle realized he'd been in her home in Yorba Linda. He was playing football for Orange Lutheran, and Ashley's brother was playing football for somewhere in Yorba Linda. And he realized he'd actually been in her home as a football guy. And all of a sudden, homelessness and the situation she was in, which was pretty raw at the time.
Yeah.
She was somebody that stood there and was asking for money and begging for food, and that he realized that those two worlds weren't that separate.
Yeah.
And that there was a beginning of her life before it got to where it was, and it was only 7 years before. So I think that changed his view of homelessness, or people standing with signs and asking for money, or a mom with a dirty stroller and an unkept child. I don't think he'll ever have the same judgment of that, because the worlds collided. And that the only way to do that is through relationships. The only way he discovered that was through this friendship he had with her.
And that's what's cool, is that's what it could become, was a friendship. And and I know it was messy.
Yeah, it was messy and all kinds of things, and stories. But the friendship remains today with both those parents. And another fun Calvary story is one of the youth at Calvary, actually someone in college, called when this same mom was struggling on the streets, came into her restaurant, and she called me to say, Karen, your person is here. I've given her something to eat and hanging out with her until you get here. So this family that Calvary worked with felt like we were everywhere. Everywhere they went, there was somebody. They would feel caught a little bit, but it was more, there was just someone catching them.
Yeah.
And
so
over and over, they kept being caught by somebody, and it was part of our church family that felt like this was our story. So
love that.
So that's what the church and host families become, an extended family. I like to use the word safety net. And like my own mom and our own family, we all get to a point in our life when we need a safety net. It's not a uncommon thing for all of us to have had a time in our life.
Well, I've had to say, Dad, can I borrow some money or whatever? These moments in life.
Yeah. So if we could just realize none of us are that far from needing the handout or somebody else to come. It's more fun to be the host than the one being hosted, but they're both important.
Yeah, and I've had some friends who here at Calvary who have been host families, and they've even had that kind of experience of almost just a couple nights here and there. Like that kind of a relationship with the family that they support, and it's just for whatever, and I love how you even having a heart of, as we're listening here, it's not about the reasons why the people need it, but it's, I'm sure as you build relationship, then it can become part of that. But they're able just to be that support structure when that
Right.
person needs it.
And people have asked us to get more sophisticated and do this and add this in a work program and a job training program. And we've stayed as pure as we can, is that what the church is offering is relationship.
Yep.
And if we could just do that, we
Yep.
don't need, there is sophisticated, great programs across America and systems.
Right.
But what is not there is relationship.
Right.
And that, you've heard the analogy of, or when you're in an airplane, they say, put your mask on
First, the oxygen
first,
mask.
and
Yeah.
then as you can, help your child.
Yeah.
That's the idea of it,
Yep.
is if we could just help the families get their own masks on. And,
Yes.
and by doing that is to help out with their kids so they don't lose their children in the process, because that's kind of the story. So
Yeah.
we really are only asking for a relationship.
Okay. And we've talked about this a lot at Calvary, over the years here and there. Probably haven't talked about it as much recently as we
Yeah.
could have been or should have been. But this is the kind of thing that we want people in the church to
Yeah.
be able to go check out and see how they can be a host family, right?
Yeah, a host family or a family friend. Hosting is you open your home. A family friend is you just open your heart. So
okay.
there's families that don't need any overnight help, but they need
Okay.
a consistent
Yeah.
aunt or uncle or friend.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't
Yeah.
even know if I was aware of that shift.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So for every host family that helps another family, we call them family friends that
Okay.
surround them.
Okay.
So there's no host family that ever hosts, hopefully ever, on their own.
Okay.
But there's always a circle of family friends.
Yep.
And those are people that just help with all the extras.
Yeah, that's cool. And that's where, I think even sometimes with some of these, there's probably informal versions of that as well. Just how we kind of support
Yeah.
those who are doing it and just help out.
Yeah, the informal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it's picking up these people's other kids from school or whatever,
Right.
while you've got a kid with you that's not,
Yeah.
in your
Pull
normal
another
routine.
seat up to the table and
Yeah.
I think we need to not make it so hard.
Yes.
Just offer what you can for right now.
Yeah. And so I love is how you had said that you found out about this whole thing with Dr. Anderson, and then you started this, it was while you were still working at Olive Crest.
Right.
And then started saying, okay, how can we bring this
To the West
To the
Coast.
West Coast. Yeah. And then you gathered this group of people that were kind of in that industry, either in that industry. What do
Yeah.
you call that industry even? What do you...
Organization or I don't know.
social work?
Industry's okay. Yeah.
Sorry, or in that world of
Yeah. Yeah.
So people that were in that world, or if there were other pastors or things like that, and it was a really cool group of people just getting to think and dream and
Yeah.
give you this give you ideas, and then you
Yeah.
guys just ran with it.
Yeah, if this can happen in Chicago on a small scale, what would it look like if we brought it here?
Yeah.
And then Calvary, I was telling Eric before we started, I just went to my own church and I said, hey, Eric, what if we did this?
Yeah.
And what if our church, and I started where I lived, which
Yeah.
was here,
Yeah.
and just said, do you think we can do it? And, we can go therefore into all the world, which Calvary would be a church that can tell that story.
Right.
And yet we were meeting at that time, Temple Calvario and Pastor De Leon.
Yep.
He'd been at Temple Calvario for 30-something years, and I'd been here. We had never met.
Right. I know.
And we just started, even our church names were similar, and we started swapping stories, and he started teaching me, and I started teaching him, and our resources came together. And then, so it was an exciting, God-breathed year.
Yeah.
And it was 2007-08 when the Great Recession was hitting, so there was no money.
That's right.
So this was not a time to start something new.
Yeah.
And yet the world said, we got to do more.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was so cool because, it was so cool for me to be part of that. I was blessed to be part of that,
Yeah.
and you helped connect even me to somebody like Lee De Leon and at Temple Calvario, which, if you guys don't know, this is a church on the kind of the other end of town. We're on the far sort of east end of town, they're
Yeah.
on the far west end of town, and just an incredible church with amazing ministries of how they're impacting the city. And we've maybe a little bit before that also, and since then have been partnering with them in so much. And Lee's spoken on panels here, even with you. And, and so we just appreciate him. I'm going to be on a call with him and a group of pastors later this week.
Yeah.
And so it's cool how some of that like connected even beyond Safe Families to help just unite the church.
He told me a funniest story. I'll tell it real quick. I showed him my list of 12 churches, Calvary Church Santa Ana being on the top of that list, that were willing to do this.
Yeah.
And that we were going to recruit families, and then we were going to host. Many of the children were Spanish-speaking children. And so I showed him my list, and there was other Spanish-speaking pastors there, and they were looking at the list. They passed it around, and they kept looking at the people. They'd put their finger up by each church, and they would say, turkey thrower, turkey thrower, turkey thrower, turkey. And I said, what are you guys saying? I thought they were saying something in Spanish. And I said, what are you guys saying?
Yeah.
And they were saying turkey thrower. And I go, what's a turkey thrower? Ah, ha, ha. They laughed and laughed. And they said, it's churches that throw turkeys into Santa Ana during Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yes.
And I said, turkey thrower? And, of course, our agency had all kinds of delivered frozen turkeys. And I'm sure I threw turkeys, called and offered. And he said, number one, we don't eat turkeys. We eat tamales.
Yeah.
And second of all, our ovens don't fit frozen turkeys. And how they thought that was funny, and it was all jovial, but it was so convicting for me to listen to them, and for them to already have recognized, P.S., we weren't a turkey thrower church, so congratulations, Calvary Santa Ana. But I was a turkey thrower because as a nonprofit, I had a lot of donations that I shared. And so
you can throw turkeys and do some other stuff.
Yeah. At the time, it was just how we lose relevance.
Yes, you're right.
How we give how we want to give, not what people need.
Yes.
And so that was the beginning of a fun relationship where I learned a lot.
Yeah, you're right. It's important too I think it's a couple things that are in there, like that we just talked about, a couple important things. One, and I want to get back to the stay at your home. Yeah. But one is this whole turkey thrower thing. I think for people, when you're thinking about, just like the person listening, like when you're thinking about how can I serve, it's so important to think about how can you meet the needs of the people you're ministering to rather than just kind of doing anything that you think is good, right? Like there's this whole, more and more people are kind of getting this, I think, lately, of like with the When Helping Hurts book that came out and stuff like that. Yeah, and so really important, I think, for us to have a deeper understanding of the need and the humanity of the people that we're trying to serve.
And that'll all be solved by relationship.
Yes.
Because if you knew the family you were giving it to, you would know their oven.
Yes.
So if the relationship is there, kind of love covers a multitude of sins. Like we won't really make those mistakes.
Right.
If the relationship is there. And that'll cover that. And so I remember a mom we hosted that she had all these sparkly clothes for her 5-year-old to wear to Calvary, and they were inappropriate to drop her off in the 5-year-olds. And she thought she was bringing dress-up clothes, for her daughter to go to church.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I'm going to run over to Target and get her some new clothes. And I remember stopping myself because Target was convenient for me, but it would have shamed that mom. And so I ran over to the thrift store and got a bag of great stuff, things I knew she could afford if she was with me. And that took longer, and it was a little more of a hassle, but I was more joining her. I was I was buying things, and she had a 9-year-old daughter that loved running around the store with me. So I didn't offer the kids something that mom couldn't offer them.
Oh, wow.
And that took work.
Yeah.
And I had to stop and think, because it would have been quicker and faster to go to my little world and accomplish that. So by the time the mom came back, I was able to offer something that she could give her kids. So anyways, it's just little things like that where in the relationship you don't want to ever hurt.
Right.
You just want to hang out.
Yep. That's cool.
Help out and hang out, but not have a one down thing. So relationship will cover that.
Yeah. How have you found, because I bet the biggest thing people get sort of nervous about being a host home then is like, okay, what kind of relationship am I entering into? Like, is this going to be scary? Is this messy? Like all of that. Like,
I think that's important. What's really important is that the host family and the bio family just get to have a friendship.
Okay.
And so we've put some structure in. We call it a family coach, and
Okay.
so
You meet
kind
at
of the
neutral spots and
professional
stuff
side.
like that?
Yeah. We don't ask anyone to invite the family to their homes. In fact, many people meet here at Calvary, the playground, or McDonald's, or it's there's all kinds of ways to let the relationship have a warmth to it without mixing each other in each other's homes until you choose to.
Yep.
It's I can't say that word enough. If the relationship can be there, then once that starts, you'll know what to do. But we do have somebody called a family coach that manages the professional side of the relationship, so that really all the two families need to do is talk about where to meet or where to eat dinner, or try to keep it at the friendship level and let any kind of professional issues be handled with somebody trained to do that.
Oh, that makes sense. And that's like sort of, okay, that maybe brings a little bit of security to the person that maybe is thinking about this, but it's just like, do I just invite some random person to my house that I don't know that we know is...
We don't recommend that, actually.
Yeah, that doesn't seem...
Because we don't, that's not the need.
Right.
The need isn't that.
Okay, cool.
It's really the great acceptance. It's more joining them out there, hanging out with them.
Cool. And you'd said something about, because like the way that you had thought of how to start was just to start at your home. And so that's why you said, okay, I'm going to start with Calvary. This is my home.
Yeah.
I'm just going to see how we can, see how this works out here. How do you see that as kind of like maybe a principle in general for people to be thinking of?
Yeah, I think, to start where you're comfortable.
Where you're comfortable,
yeah. And not that you don't want to get uncomfortable, but do what you're already good at, and then let God expand and enlarge your territory. Don't enlarge your territory yourself, because that's not what I think people are comfortable with.
Yeah.
But what is it you can do?
Yeah,
and then just do that.
That's good.
And so that's kind of always been my motto. And I remember launching Safe Families, and the Orange County Register was here, and the chief of police, and it was here at Calvary. There's about 100 people over there, and it was a year later, and I was in awe, like, what happened? How did this go? And from this, now we're in 40 states. It's just in Chicago when it started.
Right.
And it was here at the West Coast that really the expansion and a model was built. But yeah, it was small. It was just, hey, Eric, think you could help me with this? And Matt Doan, and just
a couple of families here.
And a couple of families at Calvary were original families. Rick and I were one of the original families. Let's just see. But I didn't ever have a vision for what God had a vision for.
Right. That's cool. And you're willing to live it. That's what's good, too. You're willing to live it yourself. And
it's kind of mandatory in our movement.
Yeah, that's
that
good.
Leaders need to host.
Okay.
Because it's if you don't really know your story. So we did what, made sense for our family.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so all of that, I just think, like, do you have, like, I think about just the sort of the foster care, the adoption system. It's just, we know it's broken, right? We know it's messy. Like, do you have other, I didn't pre-ask you this. Do you have sort of other hopes and dreams of how we can sort of help repair that or something? It's something that's been on my heart for a long time, of just like wishing, I know, because basically I know Safe Families is that.
Yeah.
Right. But
yeah, I have a lot of ideas all the time. I was talking to a researcher from Baylor that was saying, how can we help talk to the church about our neighbors? How can we help? So he's even thinking from a research is, what are ways we could, help people to feel braver.
Wow.
To love our neighbor, because we're willing to love our neighbors, but sometimes I don't think we realize the impact of an offered hand up. Yeah. Not even up, a hand out. Just hold, So, there's a lot of interesting things reeling around in my head. But whether, if you think of life as a river and children being raised, there's a whole river to get involved in. The brave, the foster parents, and then these phenomenal adoptive parents that say, I can do this for life. Right. And everybody just evaluate, where can I stand? Yep. And so prevention of child abuse tends to be my passion. Yes. And then the emancipated youth are the kids that don't have families yet. They're even farther up the river.
Yes.
If we could really help them get on their feet, they won't become families living on the street. So it's just, I think I'm most inspired in this movement about the church.
Good.
Because I cringed when I said, church, do you think we could do this? And I wasn't sure.
Right.
And I wasn't sure we could do it, and we did it.
Yeah.
Just on the phone today with all the Oregon fires, and there's an elementary school that 80% of the children in that school are homeless, have lost their homes in this little area, and where Safe Families is there. And so, of course, this isn't child abuse, but those Safe Families are taking in all those kids.
Oh, see?
And so, because they're comfortable, it was easy for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and so they were telling me that on the phone today. Is this okay? Because these families aren't, on the abuse.
Right. On the road to abuse or something.
But they're at the risk to disintegrate.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you're a safe place for them. So that's the church.
Right.
And so, I think my idea is just to help invite the church to be braver in finding creative ways to love their neighbor and teach me your ways. You know, this is my idea. What's yours?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Because I think like this is a huge area that we even need to continue to grow in, that if we could have more safe families out of Calvary, I would love that.
I would love that too.
For people listening just to allow, I think a big part is like allow the Holy Spirit to speak into the sort of the depth of your heart and being with some openness and then see what happens. Like you can't just say yes immediately to this. You have to be able to be prayerful about it. You know, it's a big deal.
Yeah. And I think I didn't know when I didn't think about how you also were raised in the residential world, in the world of orphan. And when I asked you as a pastor, I asked you as a Calvary guy.
Yeah, exactly.
But see, God knew.
Yeah.
You know, and so he prepares your hearts. But I think that's what I would say is, what are you good at? And do that. I mean, offer that to your neighbor.
Exactly.
And the gift really is the relationship.
Yep, absolutely.
That's what you're gifting.
Maybe a bunch of my almost empty nester friends, you know, if you're thinking you're going to...
They're a phenomenal group.
Yes, exactly.
Because it is so short term.
Yeah.
And again, it's preserving families in a different way.
So cool. So good. So good. Now, and we haven't said this, but maybe people don't know. But as this was going, because it started, like you said, back in 07, 08 with your involvement, and you're at Olive Crest, and then now this is your gig. I mean, you got some other things that you do, but you are the executive director of the Western States for this whole movement, and you office right on the Calvary property, right? The Heritage Building.
The Heritage Building is my nonprofit office over there, where I get to pay a fair rent. Yeah, so that's where all those good ideas are coming. So if you ever see smoke coming out,
there you go. And then, okay, so one more thing too, just briefly, but because you also do some stuff with this whole Townsend leadership coaching. I don't know if that's what it is. Like, just give us a little brief. Like, what in the world is that?
Sometimes I wonder, is something wrong with me that I work on these two separate worlds of executives, CEOs, and successful companies and churches. And it's like, Lord, do I need to choose one or the other? And my life, my mission statement for my own life is to eradicate social isolation through the healing power of family. And that's a fancy way of saying I believe family is where healing occurs.
Wow, yeah.
But family of origin and spiritual family are in the same place for me. So the world of business leaders and pastors, well, here's something I'd say. We all stand even when it comes to attachment and growth. And so if you're a young mom living under the bridge with two little ones trying to make it, or you're a CEO running a business or a senior pastor of a church, you have the exact same needs when it comes to your own growth, needs and vulnerabilities. And so it's been fascinating to realize we're all the same. And so isolation can grip me and you, Eric, in the same way, and can destroy all that God wants us to be. So Those are the two worlds I've hung out in. And Dr. Townsend's a psychologist, written 30 books. I've written 0, but I've hung out with him professionally too, kind of grown up here in Orange County with him.
Yes.
And so he even helped with the model when we said, if all we offer is relationship and we don't do anything fancy, we don't give money, we don't buy cars, we don't run programs, is that enough? And so I used to talk to him.
Oh, cool.
And he did a lot of the trainings, and we believe it is. That in and of itself is the oxygen people need to live their lives.
Yeah.
So I do happen to offer that also to a group
cool.
of executive leaders, and I run a group, 2 groups, kind of families,
Okay.
business family people that meet with me for a year, and we grow the exact same thing as we're growing in the Safe Families
Oh, that's cool.
movement, which is people fuel to keep life going.
Yeah. And it's both, they're both based out of relationship, really offering relationship, right? And some wisdom, which are both offering some wisdom. But that's so cool.
And we're all at risk
yes.
to get ourselves in a place where we're not fueled up to do the work that God sets before us.
And so for people out there, like I just want people to recognize as you're listening to this that if what you're being asked to offer, let's say, is relationship, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert,
Right.
or you're, you think you're really successful or really not successful, you have a big family or no family, whatever, all of that. It's like we all can offer relationship. And sometimes what people need is the introvert relationship, not this crazy extrovert relationship or whatever. Because I think sometimes an introvert kind of puts that down for them. And so I just want to encourage all people with that.
Introverts, you have the depth we need.
Yes,
and
yes.
Extroverts, you have the breadth we need, but we need you both.
We need you both.
We need you both.
Exactly. So how do people find out more? How do people get connected to Safe Families for Children?
Well, there's safe-families.org.
Okay.
But really, when it comes to Calvary, I would call the Calvary ministry here.
Yep.
And so we can get that number out. But we have our own ministry here at Calvary. We've been going 10 or 12 years.
Exactly.
And there's a gigantic tsunami of need. Child abuse reporting in America is down by 70%. The phones got turned off during COVID because teachers weren't there, pastors weren't there.
Wow.
And so there is this stomach ache again that we're all talking about, that we know hard things are happening, but our way that we reported them isn't working right now.
Okay.
So families that are struggling are struggling.
Okay.
And so we need to be available.
Yep. And that's where you could talk to Pastor Matt Doan, Pastor Jonathan Smalley, calvarylife.org/local. These are ways that we can Safe Families is a local ministry partner of ours, which is it's like an in-house ministry partner.
It's here. So
it's here.
That's where I would start, is with Matt
Okay.
Doan.
Exactly.
Probably,
And so then we'd love to help just get you connected more, and you can kind of browse around to check that out at safe-families.org. Cool. Any last words here before we close it out?
But I'd love to hear any of your ideas. Calvary Family is, this church is a place that you can practice the way that God wants you to live, like I've done. Really, a lot of this was birthed here and created and developed here and practiced before it went into the world. So I think we're a church that's willing to do ministry and think about how doing ministry together. My parents did a lot of ministry things here and kind of modeled that for me. So
Absolutely. And so that's what I love. Even this, it's an idea that people that you just said, hey, let's flesh this out. Let's talk to some people. Let's see how we can make this idea a reality. And it's going. And like you said, how many? 55,000 or something?
We've hosted 55,000. It's in 104 chapters.
That's incredible.
32 states. And then I think it's about 12 countries.
12 countries. Okay.
And that model got built here.
That whole church-based
That whole
model.
idea,
So awesome. Well, thank you so
You're
much,
welcome.
Karen.
Thanks for inviting me.
You got it. And thank you for listening to the Calvary Life Podcast.